네, 반갑습니다. 담배 피러 밖에 나가봤더니 날씨가 너무 좋아요. 빨리 그 이거를 빨리 하고 음 그리고 기분 좋게 산보를 좀 이렇게 날씨가 좋으면 이런 날은 한강변으로 나가면 좋거든요. 햇볕이 막 쏟아지던데 한강변으로 나가서 좀 천천히 서울숲 쪽으로 오늘은 좀 길게 산보를 하면 기분 좋을 것 같아요. 그 아, 아무도 나한테 이걸 앨리스 먼로 이거를 좀 더 많이 빨리 해달라고 아무도 요구를 안 하는데 나 혼자 자가 발전해 갖고 뉴요커 말씀드렸잖아요. 그 허들이 있다고. 한 달에 2개밖에 다운로드를 볼 수가 없다고. 좀 답답해 갖고 결국은 구독을 했어요. 그래서 이렇게 저렇게 뉴요커가 주 내용이 되는 그것들을 이제 PDF 파일로 변환하는 걸 이렇게 해봤더니 뉴요커를 포함한 이런저런 잡지에 앨리스 먼로 씨가 공개를 한 저작권을 주장하지 않겠다고 한 게 16개라고 나와 있는데 해다 보니까 19개야. 도대체 뭐가 더 들어간 건지 정확하게 모르겠어요. 하여간 근데 해보니까 19개가 나오더라고요. 뭐 어떻게 되는 건지 모르겠는데 하여간 뭐 순서대로 조금 스피디하게 딱딱딱딱 하겠습니다. 그리고 그 F. 스캇 피츠제럴드의 작품들을 언젠간 하겠지라고 생각했는데 갑자기 이틀 전인가 새벽에 술 한잔 먹다가 갑자기 또 발진을 해갖고 The Great Gatsby를 시작을 했어요. 근데 시작은 했는데 어떻게 이거를 됐지? 문장이 이게 설명하면서 진행하기가 이게 상당히 쉽게 말하면 가볍게 말하면 tricky, 좀 그냥 있는 사실대로 말하면 당황스러울 정도로 조금은 좀 미묘한 문장들이 나와서 야, 번역하는 사람들도 정말 힘들게 번역했겠다라고 생각이 들 정도라 야, 그게 그 진도가 나가질까라고 살짝 퀘스천 마크가 좀 있는 상태에서 일단 시작은 했어요. 네, 그거 어떻게 갈지 모르겠다. 하여간 근데 앨리스 먼로 이거는 19개 정도가 PDF 파일로 이제 컨버팅 해놓은 게 있어서 이거는 빨리빨리 좀 진도를 나가 보겠습니다. 음, 낭독하는 거를 굉장히 좀 갈수록 스트레스를 받는데 야, 이게 기계가 읽어주면 좋겠다라는 생각을 하다가 누가 읽어주려면 또 이런저런 문제가 발생하니까 기계가 읽어줬으면 좋겠다라고 그 기계의 힘을 빌려보려다가 문득 그런 생각을 했어요. 야, 내가 잘하려고 노력하지 말고 기계만큼만 하자. 뭐 기계 정도가 하는 거면 훌륭하지 않을까. 너무 잘하려고 노력하지 말자. 처음부터 노력도 안 했지만 그렇게 생각했어요. 그냥 이거 기계로 변환해서 읽어드릴 수도 있거든요. 근데 그거보단 낫지 않을까? 라는 생각을 했어요. 그래서 더욱더 편하게, 그전에도 편하게 했지만 더욱더 편하게 그냥 읽어보려고요. 예, 시작해 보겠습니다. 뉴요커라는 작품의 잡지에 2004년 3월 14일 날 발표한 겁니다. The New Yorker Passion by Alice Munro, March 14th, 2004. When Grace goes looking for the Traverses summer house in the Ottawa Valley, it has been many years since she was in that part of the country. And, of course, things have changed. Highway 7 now avoids towns that are used to go right through, and it goes straight in places where, as she remembers, there used to be curves. This part of the Canadian Shield has many small lakes, which most maps have no room to identify. Even when she locates Sabot Lake or thinks she has, there seems to be too many roads leading into it from the country road. And then, when she chooses one, too many paved roads crossing it, all with names that she does not recall. In fact, there were no secret names when she was here, more than 40 years ago. There was no pavement either, just one dirt road running toward the lake, then another running rather haphazardly along the lake's edge. Now there's a village, or perhaps it's a suburb, because she does not see a post office or even the most unpromising convenience store. The settlement lies 4 or 5 streets deep along the lake, with houses strung close together on small lots. Some of them are undoubtedly summer places, the windows already boarded up, as they always were for the winter. But many others show all the signs of year-round habitation. Habitation, in many cases, by people who have filled the yards with plastic gym sets and outdoor grills and training bikes and motorcycles and picnic tables, where some of them sit now having lunch or beer on this warm September day. There are other people, not so visible students, maybe, or old hippies living alone, who have put up flags or sheets of tinfoil for curtains. Small, mostly decent, cheap houses, some fixed to withstand the winter and some not. Grace would have turned back if she hadn't caught sight of the octagonal house with the fretwork along the roof and doors in every other word. The Woods house. She has always remembered it as having 8 doors, but it seems there are only 4. She was never inside to see how or if the space is divided into rooms. Mr. and Mrs. Woods were old, as Grace is now, and did not seem to be visited by any children or friends. Their quaint, original house now has a forlorn, mistaken look. Neighbors with their ghetto blasters and their half-dismembered vehicles, their toys and washing, are pushed up against either side of it. It is the same with the Travers house when she finds it, a quarter of a mile farther on. The road goes past it now, instead of ending there, and the houses next door are only a few feet away from its deep wraparound veranda. It was the first house of its kind that Grace had ever seen, 1 story high, the roof continuing without a break out over that veranda on all sides, a style that makes you think of hot summers. She has since seen many like it in Australia. It used to be possible to run from the veranda across the dusty end of the driveway, through a sandy, trampled patch of weeds and wild strawberries, and then jump, no, actually wade into the lake. Now Grace can hardly even see the lake because a substantial house, one of the few regular suburban houses here, with a 2-car garage, has been built across that very route. What was Grace really looking for when she undertook this expedition? Perhaps the worst thing would have been to find exactly what she thought she was after. The sheltering roof, a screened windows, the lake in front, the stand of maple and cedar and balm of Gilead trees behind. Perfect preservation, the past intact, when nothing of the kind could be said of herself. To find something so diminished, still existing, but made irrelevant, as the Travers house now seems to be, with its added dormer windows, its startling blue paint, might be less hurtful in the long run. And what if it had been gone altogether? She might have made a fuss if anybody had come along to listen to her. She might have bewailed the loss, but mightn't a feeling of relief have passed over her, too, of old confusions and obligations wiped away? Mr. Travers had built the house, that is, it had it built as a surprise wedding present for Mrs. Travers. When Grace first saw it, it was perhaps 30 years old. Mrs. Travers's children were widely spaced. Gretchen, 28 or 29, already married and a mother herself. Maury, 21, going into his last year of college. And then there was Neil in his mid-30s. But Neil was not a Travers. He was Neil Borrow. Mrs. Travers had been married before to a man who had died. For a few years, she had earned her living and supported her child as a teacher of business English at a secretarial school. Mr. Travers, when he referred to this period in her life before he'd met her, spoke of it as a time of hardship, almost like penal servitude, something that would barely be made up for by a whole lifetime of comfort, which he would happily provide. Mrs. Travers herself didn't speak of it that way at all. She had lived with Neil in a big old house broken up into apartments, not far from the railway tracks in the town of Pembroke. And many of the stories she told at the dinner table were about events there, about her fellow tenants and the French-Canadian landlord, whose harsh French and tangled English she imitated. The stories could have had titles, like the stories by James Thurber that Grace had read in The Anthology of American Humor, found unaccountably on the library shelf at the back of her grade 10 classroom. The night old Mrs. Cromarty got out on the roof, how the postman courted Miss Flowers, the dog who ate sardines. Mr. Travers never told stories and had little to say at dinner, but if he came upon you looking, for instance, at the Fieldstone fireplace, he might say, "Are you interested in rocks?" and tell you how he has searched and searched for the particular pink granite, because Mrs. Travers had once exclaimed over a rock like that, glimpsed in a road cut. Or he might show you the not really unusual features that he personally had added to the house. The corner cupboard shelves swinging outward in the kitchen, the storage space under the window seat. He was a tall, stooped man with a soft voice and thin hair slicked over his scalp. He wore bathing shoes when he went into the water, and though he did not look fat in his clothes, a pancake fort of white flesh slopped over the top of his bathing trunks. Grace was working that summer at the hotel at Bailey's Falls, just north of Sable Lake. Early in the season, the Travers family had come to dinner there. She had not noticed them. It was a busy night, and they were not at one of her tables. She was setting up a table for a new party when she realized that someone was waiting to speak to her. It was Maury, he said. I was wondering if you'd like to go out with me sometime. Grace barely looked up from shooting out the silverware. She said, is this your dad? Because his voice was high and nervous, and he stood there stiffly, as if forcing himself. And it was known that sometimes a party of young men from the cottages would dare one another to ask a waitress out. It wasn't entirely a joke. They rarely would show up, if accepted, though sometimes they only meant to talk without taking you to a movie or even for coffee. So it was considered rather shameful, rather hard up of a girl to agree. What? He said painfully. And then Grace did stop and look at him. It seemed to her that she saw the whole of him in that moment. The true Maury, scared, fierce, innocent, determined. Okay, she said quickly. She might have meant okay, calm down. I can see it's not a dare, or okay, I'll go out with you. She herself hardly knew which, but he took it as agreement and at once arranged it without lowering his voice or noticing the looks that he was getting from the diners around him to pick her up after work the following night. He did take her to the movies. They saw Father of the Bride. Grace hated it. She hated girls like Elizabeth Taylor's characters, spoiled rich girls of whom nothing was ever asked, but that they wither and demand. Maury said that it was just a comedy, but she told him that that was not the point. She could not quite make clear what her point was. Anybody would have assumed that it was because she worked as a waitress and was too poor to go to college, and because if she wanted that kind of wedding, she would have to save up for years to pay for it herself. Maury did think this and was stricken with respect for her, almost with reverence. She could not explain or even quite understand that it wasn't jealousy she felt, it was a rage. And not because she couldn't shop like that or dress like that, but because that was what girls were supposed to be like. That is what men, people, everybody thought they should be like. Beautiful, treasured, spoiled, selfish, pea-trained, pea-brained. That was what a girl had to be, or be fallen in love with. Then she'd become a mother and be all mutually devoted to her babies. Not selfish anymore, but just as pea-brained forever. Grace was fuming about this while sitting beside the boy who had fallen in love with her because she had believed instantly in the integrity and uniqueness of her mind and Saul had seen her poverty as a romantic gloss on that. He would have known she was poor, not just because of her job, but because of her strong Ottawa Valley accent. He honored her feelings about the movie. Indeed, now that he had listened to her angry struggles to explain, he struggled to tell her something in turn. In turn, he said he saw now that it was not anything so simple, so feminine as jealousy. He saw that it was that she would not stand for frivolity, was not content to be like most girls. She was special. Grace was wearing a dark blue ballerina skirt, a white blouse, through whose eyelid frills the upper curve of her breast was visible, and a white rose-colored elasticized belt. There was a discrepancy, no doubt, between the way she presented herself and the way she wanted to be judged. But nothing about her was dainty or pert or polished. It was in the style of the time, a bit ragged around the edges, in fact, giving herself gypsy airs with the very cheapest silver-painted bangles and the long, wild-looking curly dark hair that she had to put into a snood when she waited on tables. Special. He told his mother about her, and his mother said, "You must bring this Grace of yours to dinner." It was all new to her, all immediately delightful. In fact, she fell in love with Mrs. Travers almost exactly as Maury had fallen in love with her, though it was not in her nature, of course, to be as openly dumbfounded, as watchful as he was. Grace had been brought up by her aunt and uncle, really her great aunt and great uncle. Her mother had died when she was 3 years old, and her father had moved to Saskatchewan, where he now had another family. Her standing parents were kind, even proud of her, but they were not given to conversation. The uncle made his living caning chairs, and he had taught Grace how to cane so that she could help him and eventually take over the business when his eyesight failed. But then she had got the job at Bailey's Falls for the summer, and though it was hard for him and for her aunt as well to let her go, they believed that she needed a taste of life before he settled down. She was 20 years old and had just finished high school. She should have finished a year earlier, but she had made an odd choice. In the very small town where she lived, it was not far from Mrs. Travers's Pembroke. There was nevertheless a high school that offered 5 grades to prepare students for the government exams and what was then called senior matriculation. It was never necessary to study all the subjects offered, and at the end of her first year in grade 13, what should have been her final year, Grace took examinations in history and botany and geology and English and Latin and French, receiving unnecessarily high marks. But there she was in September, back again, proposing to study physics and chemistry, trigonometry, geometry, and algebra, though these subjects were considered particularly hard for girls. She did creditably well in all 3 branches of mathematics and sciences, though her results were not as spectacular as they had been the year before. She thought then of teaching herself Greek and Spanish and Italian and German so that she could try those exams the following year. Those subjects were not taught by a teacher at her school, but the principal took her aside and told her that this was getting her nowhere, since she was not going to be able to go to college. And anyway, no college requires such a full plate. Why was she doing it? Did she have any plans? No, Grace said. She just wanted to learn everything you could learn for free before she started her career of caning. It was the principal who knew the manager of the inn at Bailey's Falls and said that he would put in a word for her if she wanted to try for a summer waitressing job. He too mentioned getting a taste of life. So even the man in charge of learning in that place did not believe that learning had to do with life. He thought that what she had done was crazy, as everyone else did, except Mrs. Travers, who had been sent to business college instead of a real college in order to make herself useful, and who now wished like anything, she said that she had crammed her mind first with what was useless. By trading shifts with another girl, Grace managed to get Sundays off from breakfast on. This meant that she always worked late on Saturdays, and in fact, it meant that she had traded time with Maury for time with Maury's family. She and Maury could never see a movie now, never have a real date. Instead, he would pick her up when she got off work around 11 at night, and they would go for a drive, stop for ice cream or a hamburger. Maury was scrupulous about not taking her into a bar because she was not yet 21, then end up parking somewhere. Grace's memories of these parking sessions, which might last till 1 or 2 in the morning, proved to be much hazier than her memories of sitting at the Traverses round dining table or after everybody had finally got up and moved with coffee or fresh drinks on the tawny leather sofa or the cushioned wicker chairs at the other end of the room. There was never any fuss about doing the dishes. A woman, Mrs. Travers called the able Mrs. Able, would come in the morning. Molly always dragged cushions onto the rug and sat there. Gretchen, who never dressed for dinner in anything but jeans or army pants, usually sat cross-legged in a wide chair. Both she and Molly were big and broad-shouldered, with something of their mother's good looks. Her wavy, caramel-colored hair, warm hazel eyes, easily sun-browned skin. Even in Molly's case, her dimples. The other waitresses called Molly cute and hunky, and respected Grace somewhat more since she had got it. Mrs. Travers, however, was barely 5 feet tall, and under her bright moo-moos seemed not fat, but sturdily plump, like a child who hasn't stretched it up yet. And the shine, the intentness of her eyes, the gaiety that was always ready to break out in them, had not been inherited, nor had the rough red, almost a rash, on her cheeks, which was probably a result of going out in any weather without thinking about her complexion, and which, like her figure, like a moo-moos, showed her independence. There were sometimes guests, in addition to Grace, on these Sunday evenings, a couple, maybe a single person as well, usually close to Mr. and Mrs. Travers's age, and not unlike them. The women would be eager and witty, and the men quieter, slower, more tolerant. These people told amusing stories, in which the joke was often on themselves. Grace has been an engaging talker for so long now that she sometimes gets sick of herself, and it's hard for her to remember how novel these dinner conversations once seemed to her. On the rare occasions when her aunt and uncle had had company, there had been only praise of and apology for the food, discussion of the weather, and a fervent wish for the meal to be finished as soon as possible. After dinner at the Travers house, if the evening was cool enough, Mr. Travers lit a fire, and they played what Mrs. Travers called idiotic word games, for which, in fact, people had to be fairly clever to win. Here was where somebody who had been rather quiet at dinner might begin to shine. Mock arguments could be built up in defense of preposterous definitions. Gretchen's husband, Worth Watt, did this, and so after bid did Grace, to Mrs. Travers's and Maurie's delight, with Maury calling out to everyone's amusement but Grace's, "See, I told you, she's smart." Mrs. Travers herself led the way in this making up of ridiculous words, ensuring that the play did not become too serious or any player too anxious. The only time there was a problem was one evening when Mavis, who was married to Mrs. Travers's son Neil, came to dinner. Mavis and Neil and their two children were staying nearby at her parents' place down the lake. But that night she came by herself. Neil was a doctor, and he was busy in Ottawa that weekend. Mrs. Travers was disappointed, but she rallied, calling out in cheerful dismay. "But the children aren't in Ottawa, surely?" "Unfortunately not," Mavis said. "But they are thoroughly awful. They'd shriek all through dinner. The babies got prickly heat, and God knows what's the matter with Mikey." She was a slim, sun-tanned woman in a purple dress, with a matching white purple band holding back her dark hair. Handsome, but with little pouches of boredom or disapproval hiding the corners of her mouth. She left most of her dinner untouched on her plate, explaining that she had an allergy to curry. "Oh, Mavis, what a shame," Mrs. Travers said. "Is this new?" "Oh, no, I've had it for ages, but I used to be polite about it. Then I got sick of throwing up half the night." "If you'd only told me, why can't I get you?" "Don't worry about it, I'm fine. I don't have any appetite anyway." What with the heat and the joys of motherhood. She lit a cigarette. Afterward, in the game, she got into an argument with Watt over definition he'd used, and when the dictionary proved it acceptable, she said, "Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'm just outclassed by you people." And when it came time for everybody to hand in their own word on a slip of paper for the next round, she smiled and shook her head. "I don't have one." "Oh, Mavis," Miss Travers said, and Mr. Travers said, "Come on, Mavis, any old word will do." "But I don't have any old word." "I'm sorry, I just feel stupid tonight. The rest of you just play around me." Which they did, everybody pretending that nothing was wrong, while she smoked and continued to smile, her determined, unhappy smile. In a little while, she got up and said that she couldn't leave her children on their grandparents' hands any longer. She had had a lovely and instructive visit, and now she had to go home. "I must give you an Oxford dictionary next Christmas," she said to nobody in particular before she left, with a merry, bitter little laugh. The Travers dictionary, which Watt had used, was an American one. When she was gone, none of them looked at one another. Mrs. Travers said, "Gretchen, do you have the strength to make us all a pound of coffee?" And Gretchen went up to the kitchen, muttering, "What fun! Jesus slept. Jesus wept." "Well, her life is trying," Mrs. Travers said, with the two little ones. On Wednesdays, Grace got a break between clearing breakfast and setting up dinner. And when Mrs. Travers found out about this, she started driving up to Bailey's Falls to bring her down to the lake for those 3 hours. Maury would be at work then. He was spending the summer with the road gang repairing Highway 7, and Watt would be in his office in Ottawa, and Gretchen would be off with the children swimming or rowing on the lake. Usually, Mrs. Travers herself would announce that she had shopping to do or letters to write, and she would leave Grace alone in the big, cool, shaded living dining room with its permanently dented leather sofa and crowded bookshelves. "Read anything that takes your fancy," Mrs. Travers said, "or curl up and go to sleep, if that's what you'd like. It's a hard job. You must be tired. I'll make sure you're back on time." Grace never slept. She read. She barely moved, and her bare legs below her shorts became sweaty and stuck to the leather. Quite often, she saw nothing of Mrs. Travers until it was time for her to be driven back to work. In the car, Mrs. Travers would not start any sort of conversation until enough time had passed for Grace's thoughts to have shaken loose from whatever book she had been in. Then she might mention having read it herself and said what she had thought of it, but always in a way that was both thoughtful and light-hearted. For instance, she said of Anna Karenina, "I don't know how many times I've read it, but I know that first I identified with Kitty, and then it was Anna. Oh, it was awful with Anna. And now you know the last time I found myself sympathizing with Dolly. When she goes to the country, with all those children, and she has to figure out how to do the washing. There's the problem about the wash tubs. I suppose that's just how your sympathies change as you get older. Passion gets pushed behind the wash tubs. Don't pay any attention to me anyway. You don't, do you? I don't know if I pay much attention to anybody. Grace was surprised at herself, wondered if she sounded conceited. But I like listening to you talk. Mrs. Travers laughed. I like listening to myself too. Somehow, by the middle of the summer, Maury had begun to talk about their being married. This did not happen for quite a while, he said, not until after he was qualified and working as an engineer. But he spoke of it as something that she, as well as he, must be taking for granted. When we are married, he'd say, and instead of questioning or contradicting him, Grace would listen curiously. When they were married, they would have a place on Sabbath Lake, not too close to his parents, not too far away. It would be just a summer place, of course. The rest of the time, they would live wherever his work might take them. It could be anywhere, Peru, Iraq, or Northeast Territories. Grace was delighted by the idea of such travels, rather more than she was by the idea of what he spoke of, with a severe pride, as our own home. None of this seemed at all real to her, but then the idea of helping her uncle, of taking on the life of a Cherokee in the town and in the very house where she had grown up, had never seemed real either. Molly kept asking her what she had told her aunt and uncle about him, when she was going to take him home to meet them. In fact, she had said nothing in her brief weekly letters, except to mention that she was going out with a boy who works around here for the summer. She might have given the impression that he worked at the hotel. It wasn't as if she had never thought of getting married. That possibility had been in her mind, along with the life of caning cheers. In spite of the fact that nobody had ever quoted her, she had felt sure that it would happen someday, and in exactly this way, with the man making up his mind immediately. He would see her, and having seen her, he would fall in love. In her imagination, he was handsome, like Maury, passionate, like Maury, pleasurable. Physical intimacies followed. But this was the thing that had not happened. In Maury's car or out on the grass under the stars, she was willing, and Maury was ready, but not willing. He felt that it was his responsibility to protect her, and the ease with which she offered herself threw him off balance. He sensed, perhaps, that it was called a deliberate offering that he could not understand and that did not fit in at all with his notions of her. She herself did not realize how cold she was. She believed that her show of eagerness would lead to the pleasures she knew about in solitude and in her imagination, and she felt that it was up to Maury to take over, which he would not do. These sieges left them both disturbed and slightly angry or ashamed, so that they could not stop kissing, clinging, and using fond words to make it up to each other as they said good night. It was a relief to Grace to be alone, to get into bed in the hotel dormitory and blot the last couple of hours out of her mind. And she thought it must be a relief to Maury too, to be driving down the highway by himself, rearranging his impressions of his Grace so that he could stay wholeheartedly in love with her. Most of the waitresses left after Labor Day to go back to school or college, but the hotel was going to stay open till October for Thanksgiving. with a reduced staff, Grace among them. There was talk this year of opening again in early December for winter season, or at least a Christmas season, but nobody on the kitchen or dining room staff seemed to know if this would really happen. Grace wrote to her aunt and uncle as if the Christmas season were certainty, and they should not expect her back anytime soon. Why did she do this? It was not as if she had other plans. Maury was in his final year in college. She had even promised to take him home at Christmas to meet her family, and she had said that Christmas would be a good time to make their engagement formal. He was saving up his summer wages to buy her a diamond ring. She too had been saving her wages so that she would be able to take the bus to Kingston to visit him during his school term. She spoke of this, promised that so easily, but did she believe or even wish that it would happen? Molly is a stirring character, Mrs. Travers said. Well, you can see that for yourself. He'll be a dear, uncomplicated man like his father. Not like his brother. Neil is very bright. I don't mean that Maury isn't. You certainly don't get to be an engineer without a brain or two in your head, but Neil is. He's deep. She laughed at herself. Deep, unfathomable caves of ocean bed. What am I talking about? For a long time, Neil and I didn't have anybody but each other. So I think he's special. I don't mean he can't be fun, but sometimes people who are the most fun can be melancholy, can't they? You wonder about them, but what's the use of worrying about your grown-up children? With Neil, I worry a lot. With Maury, only a tiny little bit. And Gretchen, I don't worry about at all. Because women have always got something, haven't they, to keep them going. The house on the lake was never closed up till Thanksgiving. Gretchen and the children had to go back to Ottawa, of course, for school. And Maury had to go to Kingston. Mr. Travers could come out only on weekends. But Mrs. Travers had told Grace that she usually stayed on, sometimes with guests, sometimes by herself. Then her plans changed. She went back to Ottawa with Mr. Travers in September. This happened unexpectedly. The Sunday dinner that week was cancelled. Maury explained that his mother got into trouble now and then with her nerves. She has to have a rest, he said. She has to go into the hospital for a couple of weeks or so, and they get her stabilized. She always comes out fine. Grace said that Mrs. Travers was the last person she would have expected to have such troubles. What brings it on? I don't think they know, Morris said, but after a moment he added, well, it could be her husband. I mean, her first husband, Neil's father. What happened with him, etc. What had happened was that Neil's father had killed himself. He was unstable, I guess, but I don't know if it even is that. It could be her age and female problems and all that sort of thing. But it's okay. They can get her straightened out easy now with drugs. They've got traffic drugs. Don't worry about it. By Thanksgiving, as Maury had predicted, Mrs. Travers was out of hospital and feeling well. Thanksgiving dinner would take place at the lake as usual, and it was being held on Sunday instead of Monday. That is also customary to allow for the packing up and closing of the house. And it was fortunate for Grace because Sunday was still her day off. The whole family would be there, even Neil and Mavis and their children were staying at Mavis's parents' place. No guests, unless you counted Grace. By the time Maury brought her down to the lake on Sunday morning, the turkey was already in the oven. The pies were on the kitchen counter: pumpkin, apple, wild blueberry. Gretchen was in charge of the kitchen, as coordinated a cook, as she was an athlete. Mrs. Travers sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee and working on a jigsaw puzzle with Gretchen's younger daughter, Donna. "Ah, Grace," she said, jumping up from embrace. The first time she had ever done this, and with a clumsy motion of her hand, scattering the jigsaw pieces. Donna wailed, "Grandma!" And her older sister, Janie, who had been watching critically, scooped up the dish pieces. "We can easily put them back together," she said. "Grandma didn't mean to." "Where do you keep the cranberry sauce?" Gretchen asked. "In the cupboard," Mrs. Travers said, still squeezing Grace's arms and ignoring the destroyed puzzle. "Where's in the cupboard?" "Oh, cranberry sauce," Mrs. Travers said. "Well, I make it. First, I put the cranberries in a little water. Then I keep it on low heat. No, I think I soak them first." "Well, I haven't got time for all that," Gretchen said. "You mean you don't have any canned?" "I guess not. I must not have, because I make it. I'll have to send somebody to get some." "Dear, it's Thanksgiving," Mrs. Travers said gently. "Nowhere will be open." "That place down the highway is always open." Gretchen raised her voice. "Where's what?" "He's out in the rowboat," Mavis called from the back bedroom. She made it sound like a warning, because she was trying to get her babies to sleep. He took Mikey out in the boat. Mavis had driven over in her own car with Mikey and the baby. Neil was coming later. He had some phone calls to make, and Mr. Travers had gone golfing. "It's just that I need somebody to go to the store," Gretchen said. She waited, but no offer came from the bedroom. She raised her eyebrows at Grace. "You can't drive, can you?" Grace said no. Mrs. Travers sat down with a gracious sigh. "Well," Gretchen said, "Maury can drive. Where's Maury?" Maury was in the front bedroom looking for his swimming trunks, though everybody had told him that Dora was too cold for swimming. He said that the store would not be open. "It will be," Gretchen said. "They sell gas, and if it isn't, there's that one just coming into Perth, with the ice cream cones." Molly wanted Grace to come with him, but the two little girls, Janie and Donna, were begging her to come see the swing that their grandfather had put up under the Norway maple at the side of the house. As Grace was going down the steps, she felt the strap of one of her sandals break. She took both shoes off and walked without difficulty on the sandy soil. Across the flat pressed plantain and the many curled leaves that had already fallen. Okay. Let's take a break and continue.